So let's talk about Janet Yellen as Joe Biden's U.S. Treasury Secretary nominee. First off, I am not surprised at all based on what has happened with the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury since March. So really at this point, things are so bad with the cash flow problem in the real economy. Things are so bad with U.S. government finances and the corporate bond bubble and the amount of treasuries that need to be rolled over and sold. And there's a recent Patreon article about that for patrons if you want to take a look behind the paywall. But at this point, the finances of the U.S. government are so bad, and there are so few foreigners buying U.S. treasuries that it doesn't matter which political party is running the White House. It doesn't matter which political party is in control of one or both houses of Congress. We are basically in the last couple innings of the game here in terms of desperation for government finances with the budget deficit. The best historical comparison to what is happening now is actually similar to a wartime period of the last country with the world reserve currency before the US, England. And this is when the Bank of England was nationalized in 1946, and other industries were also nationalized. I looked up a number of articles about this last night. I spent a couple hours looking for articles, reading through stuff. So the Bank of England, railways, heavy industry, and coal mining were all nationalized in the 1946 time period. The most controversial issue was nationalization of steel, which was profitable unlike the others. Economic recovery was slow, housing was in short supply, and bread was rationed along with many necessities in short supply. It was an age of austerity. Keep in mind that this was post-World War II, and London had been heavily bombed, and the industrial base had to be rebuilt. But a comprehensive welfare state was created with the National Insurance Act in the United Kingdom in 1946, in which people in work paid a flat rate of national insurance. So the welfare state grew massively post 1946 in the United Kingdom. There was also bouts of deflation that were countered. So there was an enormous amount of taxation increases. There was universal health care. The welfare state grew. Taxation grew. The size of government also continued to grow. But what you see there on your screen is most interesting. I found a chart in another article. This article is really good. I highly recommend reading it. It's a history of United Kingdom inflation by Pete Comley, author of Monkey with a Pin. It's from the Moneyvader website from August 7th, 2013. And he found research there of inflation over the centuries for the United Kingdom. And as you can see there on your chart, the inflation for the British pound exploded right as the Bank of England was nationalized in 1946. So it's under what happened here, and then I put in red, the Bank of England was nationalized. And this is stagflate tax lie. There's a section here of the article called Britain's Financial Dunkirk. I'm not going to read the entire article. After the war in 1945, Britain's finances were in a mess. They had won the war, but in the process, government debt had soared to 237% of GDP. The Americans had given them billions, and then after VJ Day, demanded that the British government pay it back. To make matters worse from this perspective, the United Kingdom had just elected a new Labour government, or Labour Socialist at that time. They've rebranded and changed the name. Government that had promised to spend even more cash to nationalize everything. The famous John Maynard Keynes, then working for the Treasury, said Britain faced a financial Dunkirk, but roll on just 25 years and Britain's debt to GDP ratio had reduced to around 50%, a remarkable achievement. How was this economic miracle pulled off by a country that was often described in the 1960s and 1970s as the sick man of Europe? According to some detailed analysis of deleveraging by Ray Dalio Bridgewater Associates, and by the way, it wasn't real deleveraging, it was stagflate tax lie, where Ray Dalio has written in white papers about a beautiful deleveraging that never actually occurred here in the US either, where he suggested nominal GDP targeting above interest rates. So lower interest rates and move nominal GDP with currency debasement, with inflation, move nominal GDP targeting and focus a real inflation rate above interest rates. That was Ray Dalio's suggestion after he had private meetings with Federal Reserve Chairman and also Mario Draghi at the ECB, as he disclosed in his book. Detailed analysis by Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Associates, virtually all the debt in the United Kingdom was just inflated away. and the United Kingdom's ever increasing tab behind the bar. If you look at the government debt statistics, you'll find that over that period, the United Kingdom did not net pay off any debt whatsoever. Instead, it actually increased net debt from £2.6 billion in 1947 to £3.3 billion in 1970. Moreover, if you start poring over the debt numbers, as the author of this article did for a book, you'll notice that no UK government has had a written plan to pay down its debts since Sir Robert Walpole in the 1720s. That's pretty crazy. So again, this is common throughout history. I've been stressing this, going back through financial history. Stagflate, tax lie. Governments lie about the real inflation rate. They inflate the debt away. The government debt tab behind the Treasury bar has been rising for hundreds of years. You're still paying for the Battle of Waterloo today. There are basically only three ways governments can deal with their debts if they don't plan to pay off the capital. And I did a long interview with both Jim Rogers and Doug Casey many, many years ago. It's in the archive. Governments only have really three options. They can tax it, they can borrow it from the bond market, or they can print it. They don't even actually have to print it now. It's just digital things on a keyboard. So George Gammon, he did an excellent video recently talking about the Fed and Treasury merging and MMT, but governments have been doing this without a separate central bank when it was just the Finance Ministry or Treasury Department for a very, very long time. Governments have been devaluing the debt whenever they get in financial trouble, inflating the debt in real terms away. So this is very, very common, and there's a number of really good, this article is a must-read, the Moneyvader article, History of UK Inflation, because this was the last country that got into, it had bouts of deflation, it had bouts of unemployment, they had stagflation, they had the world reserve currency before the US, and then there's also the book, The Lords of Finance. So, but there's really good charts and graphs in here about inflation, long-term inflation since I think the 1700s with UK, and then recent inflation since the year 2000. The article came out in 2013, so it's a little bit old, but the stuff brought up in here is still pertinent to today. And unfortunately, the Treasury and Fed merging, it's just going to be worse, stagflate, tax lie, and the bond scheme with Wall Street banks and hedge funds that the Fed participates in. The Fed was remitting to the US Treasury, and there's press releases about this, $80 billion, and this is before a Fed audit, per year from this bond scheme. So if the Fed is buying more bonds with the Treasury, and once the rules got changed in March, as Jim Bianco of Bianco Research has talked about, with the Fed and Treasury starting to go on the path to merger, and that was with President Donald Trump and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. Mnuchin wasn't really a Republican. He's friends with Trump, though. And plus, Mnuchin's like a corrupt former Goldman Sachs Hollywood person. So the long-term implications are the U.S. Treasury, regardless of political party, the Treasury and the Fed are merging. This happened before MMT was even called MMT. Governments have been doing different versions of this. It's been going on by governments. Carmen Reinhart and Ken Rogoff detailed this in their book, 8 Centuries of Financial Folly. This time is different. For a very, very long time, over 800 years, thousands and thousands of years by different governments. Please consider becoming a patron over on my Patreon and chipping in $5 or more per month, so that way I can continue to do my research and make unique content and be able to make a living. Because with my YouTube channel, my Google AdWords revenues have collapsed almost to zero. My YouTube channel subscribers have stopped growing in the last 9 months. There's no growth there. And my live stream shows have been shut down, and YouTube tech support is giving me all types of excuses, claiming that they did not put a strike on my account, even though I can't edit the title for a live stream show. I cannot turn monetization back on. I cannot even turn live chat back on. That's how bad things are with the live stream show. I have almost 150, and hopefully soon it will be over 150 unique pieces of content behind the paywall on Patreon in terms of well-researched articles. Some of the articles have taken me many, many hours to produce for lots of different topics about gold miners, silver miners, precious metal royalty and streaming companies, a lot of articles about the oil industry. and other commodity industries, also global macro related articles. There's also audio podcasts on a lot of stock charts and technical analysis there too. And while you are getting unique content, if I go over 1,200 patrons and I stay there, I will sign up for another live streaming service just for patrons. So I will make this pledge, I will make this promise. If I go over 1,200 patrons and I stay there, so if I drop below 1,200 patrons, the promise is not going to stay. I have to stay at 1,200 patrons and stay there. I will start to do live stream shows just for patrons behind the paywall there. Will require additional capital. I will have to sign up. I think it's $100 a month for another service there to integrate with Patreon, to sign up there and integrate. So that will be an additional added bonus for patrons if you want to take me up on that. But please chip in if you can, as YouTube is basically trying to make this impossible for me to grow my channel or to make a living from making content.